How do you build a culture that affirms, respects, and honors those people that for 4 decades we've condescendingly referred to as blue collar? What you do is you create meaningful, affirming, noble tasks that integrate us instead of segregate us, and integrate us into our ecological umbilical and reattach our connections to the humus as humans. And that, I suggest, is a cultural slam dunk.
We are at Joel Salatin's farm, Polyface Farm, for the famous Lunatic Farm Tour. I'm crunched up under here in the umbrella. It is pouring the rain. I've got to catch up to get this tour started. Farm work, including tours, go on, rain or shine. There's the family. I think they're gonna have a lot of fun. Kids don't seem to mind the rain.
You made it.
Yes, we're here. Rain or shine.
So here's what we're gonna do. If you didn't catch this earlier, we're gonna do a fast tour. We're gonna take about 30 minutes or less and try to see everything. We'll go to pigs, broilers, egg mobiles, and cows. Then we're gonna end up at that hoop house over there, take our hay bales in to sit on, and there's chairs in there as well. Does that sound okay with everybody? This is called rain or shine farming, man.
The animals are still hungry and thirsty, aren't they, Joe?
That's right. As Teresa says, it's every day. Christmas, Easter,
yeah.
Thanksgiving, when you're sick, on
yes.
your birthday.
Yeah.
You don't get the day off. It's every day.
They don't celebrate holidays, do they, those animals?
Hang on! When we run over people, it really dampens the tour. So I want everybody to hang on and not fall off and get run over. Everybody okay? Did we survive? But let me just give you a real brief overview, and we'll go in the order we went, okay? So we went out and we went to the pigs first, and they all came to greet us very happily. And that is about a 5-paddock pig pasture. We have, I don't know, a dozen of those. So that's one group of about, 8 groups of pigs we have out right now. You saw the electric fence, waterer, feeder, and every time they finish that feeder, they get moved to a fresh paddock. And so that feeder becomes a constant disturbance amount. 50 100-pound pigs in 8 days will disturb the ground as much as 50 200-pound pigs in 4 days. Are you with me? It's about animal. It's about weight on the ground. Okay, and so that feeder makes sure that we don't over disturb. And when we say disturb, we use the word disturb like we would use the word exercise. The ecology, well, I've heard people say that the environment is essentially just between catastrophes. You think of catastrophic stuff environmentally, whether it's a flood, a drought, a volcano, a hurricane, a tornado, a blizzard. These are all, events. A herd of buffalo, bison running through, right? Fire, okay? So when you think of historically the way the ecology was, it actually kind of went from catastrophic event to catastrophic event. And so the pigs are duplicating that catastrophic event. You see, Virginia Tech foresters will tell you, Penn State foresters, any land-grant university right now in the east of the Mississippi will tell you that our forests are dying. When you go to the Shenandoah National Park, the number of diseased and dead and down trees is astounding. You can go up here to the woods, cut almost any oak tree, and it'll be bad inside. We're losing our forests. The reason is because there's no disturbance. All right? And so we don't have fire anymore. If you start a fire, a little red fire engine comes out with a siren and puts the fire out, right? We don't have 6 million head herd of bison anymore being chased by 1 million wolves to create disturbance. What we have is electric fence and pigs. And so we are trying to duplicate that silvopasture ecology of disturbance and rest that was here 600 years ago. It's quite astounding that 600 years ago, what is today the United States, grew way more food than we do today with chemical fertilizer, John Deere tractors. You know, when you add up those things, and the diaries are quite powerful. 7 million head herd of bison. Captain Jim Bridger documented that in the Dakotas when he was there. Now that's always kind of intrigued me, Lieutenant, come up here a minute, please. Could you sharpen your quill a minute and get out a fresh piece of parchment? All right, start putting down marks. All right, 1, 2, 3. And there's a diary from a guy in Arkansas in 1870. Came over a ridge, and he said, and what he did, he couldn't see the whole herd of bison, so he had a watch and he timed how fast they were moving past him to get a miles per hour, and then timed how many hours it took them to move past him to get how long the herd was. And the herd was 50 miles long and 20 miles wide. And he said, I couldn't see any prairie between their bodies. We can hardly fathom the amount of production that was here. The passenger pigeons, Audubon sat under a tree in 1800, and he wrote in his diary, he said, I couldn't see the sun for 3 days because the birds blocked the sun for 3 days. One flock of birds. 3 days. Anybody seen a flock of birds block out the sun for 3 days? I mean, even starlings. Okay? No. And now those passenger pigeons are extinct. And so it's really hard for us to conceive of the amount of abundance that this animal, this symbiotic choreography created. I mean, there were 2 million wolves that all needed 20 pounds of meat a day. And so it wasn't all, human food, but it was food nonetheless. It was an herbivore, perennially based ecology, okay, that was incredibly abundant. So the pigs are moved every few days. As they empty that feeder, they're moved every few days, and they are disturbing and awakening the latent seed bank that's in the ground, okay, to come on. Now, if they stay too long, it goes to weeds. If they don't stay long enough, it goes back to forest. So to freeze an ecosystem in a sweet spot, you have to have just the right amount of disturbance and just the right amount of rest. And we have made mistakes in both extremities over the years, and finally come to this kind of recipe of so many pounds of feed per square foot per so many days, and that creates the constant. All right, that's pigs. Another thing I hope you appreciated as we went by the pigs was to realize how embedded that was in the ecology. You put that up next to an interstate, and the average car going by, they don't even know there were pigs there. And we think that it's a good thing in farming if the commercial farm is so nested into the womb of the ecology that the ecology becomes the cool thing and not the farm infrastructure. Industrial farming, Tyson chicken houses, Smithfield confinement factories, crop dusting airplanes. We think of farming, we tend to think of all the infrastructure, human, right, as opposed to our cleverness being demonstrated aesthetically and humbly nested kind of, you know, into that ecology. Now people always say, well, you can't feed the world like this. You know, it takes too much land to feed the world like this. Well, remember, when you see the pigs up there like that, when you see a picture of this big confinement animal feeding operation, and the industry says, look how efficient we are, you know, look at all the food we're producing in this little itty bitty footprint, they're not showing the footprint of all the square miles of grain going into it, and the square miles of land trying to handle all the effluent coming out of it, okay? What you're seeing, so the point is that even here, even if the pigs never eat any grass, and if they never ate any you know, weeds or brush or whatever, worms and caterpillars. I mean, there are omnivores, right? We always tell kindergarten classes, kids, it's fine to come in, but keep moving. They're omnivores. You know? And they like toes and fingers and spleens and kidneys and all sorts of good stuff. So even if the pigs didn't scavenge anything off of their ecology there, it wouldn't take any more land to grow pigs this way than it does in a confinement house. The only difference is there's no concrete, there's no fans, there's no bank mortgage, there's no slurry hauler pit, you know, and nobody's getting nauseous being neighbors to the pig farm. So it's a different deal. All right, so we went from the pigs. We went, and I hope you noticed the sheep there on the side as we went with the netting around them. That's our grandson Andrew's sheep. We went on up the hill. We almost didn't get up the hill, but we did get up the hill, and we made it, and went up to that set of pullets. I moved the chicken shelter for you. Okay, so I moved the shelter. So here's the deal. This is a little song and dance on that when we have time to sit and jaw about it. Those shelters, there's 3 M's here. Okay, so if you're trying to remember here, this is 3 M's. The first M is that they're mobile. All right, think about it. The average American farmer now is 60 years old. Why is the American farmer 60 years old? The average American farmer, 60 years old.
Expensive.
People don't want to farm.
All right, here's the deal. Yeah, you're all hitting it. When the impediments to entry for young people are so high that young people can't get in, old people can't get out. Okay, so both generations are stuck. What's the single biggest impediment to entry?
Money.
Cost of land, right? So I have a proposition today. What if you don't have to buy the land? What if the land becomes a moot point? That really changes the impediment to entry, right?
Yeah.
So when you have mobile infrastructure, and if you come back in 2 months and we have the turkeys out, we have the cow shade mobiles going, of course the broilers will be out, the Millennium Feather Net will be working, we have pig shelters. The deal is that all the infrastructure is portable. When it's mobile, you don't have to own the land because you can place the farm anywhere. What makes a piece of land a farm as opposed to, a residential or a park or whatever is not there's something special about the land. It's what a farmer has done to that piece of land. That's my problem with all these farmland preservation efforts. I appreciate them, but ultimately if we don't preserve farmers, we won't preserve farmland. The only reason a farmland is a farmland is because what a farmer has done to it. If you take the farmer away, you don't have a farm anymore. Okay, so the mobile infrastructure allows you to place that farm business and stuff on unowned land. That takes a huge impediment off. The next M, and furthermore, that mobile infrastructure is an unknown in government circles. What are those? Are they machines? Well, no, not really. Are they buildings? Well, no, not really. So there's no taxes, no licenses. No, they do not exist in the tax or the property or zoning or anything. And I like it when the government doesn't know what I've got. That suits me just fine. So mobile infrastructure. All right. Second M, they're modular. Okay, if I want to grow chickens for Tyson, what's the first thing I got to do? Build a $500,000 factory house, right? Yeah. Out the get-go. I mean, they don't let me build a house that I can only do 50 chickens in. They're not interested in 50 chickens. I got to start with this, football field size structure. Would you call that an impediment to entry? Yeah, I would. But here, all you got to do is shut down Netflix and don't go to the movies and don't go out to eat for a month, and you can build one. Okay? It only costs a couple $100. You build one, and if you like it, you can build another one. And if you don't, and if you don't like it, you can quit, and you're not out much. Okay? And so it's easy to test and to play and play with. So being modular, you can start with one. If you really like it, you can build the second one. If you really like it, you can build, and if you're nuts like we are, you can build 150 of them. Okay? But that allows you to enter and to scale without borrowing money and without financial prejudice. That's huge. Okay? Modular. And the third M is they're management intensive. Yeah, I had to get off the tractor, go around there, take that little dolly, and move them, right? And that's when the industry points their fingers at me and says, aha, gotcha. See, I knew it'd take more labor to farm this way. Of course it takes more labor to farm this way. I say, yep, guilty. You know why? Because we have strategically substituted pharmaceutical intensity, capital intensity, energy intensity, and infrastructure intensity for labor. So we have purposely substituted all of those things with people. And I suggest that that's a good trade. And you know what happens when you substitute it with people? Suddenly our equity moves from depreciable physical infrastructure to non-depreciable skill, information, and customers. And there's not a bank in the world that can ever come to you and say, I'm going to foreclose on your skill. Right? Nobody can come and say, I'm going to repossess your information. Right? And so when you move your equity from physical to non-physical, it creates financial and business resiliency. And that creates a nimble, that's the word right now in business, right? You got to be nimble. It's not the big that eat the small, it's the fast that eat the slow, right? All these business book titles. And so nimble is what you can do when your equity is non-stationary and non-physical. What are the 3 M's? Mobile, modular, management intensive, and be proud of it. All right? And then we went over to the eggmobile. So the eggmobile follows the cows in a pasture sanitation system. The chickens scratch through the cow patties, eat them out, eat the fly larvae, eat the grasshoppers and crickets, turn those into eggs, and act as a biological sanitizer like the egret on the rhino's nose. Okay, this bird herbivore symbiosis, this choreography in nature. And so while other people are putting their cows through the head gate, losing their religion and yelling at everybody and getting kicked and whatever, we just go out and collect $100,000 worth of eggs as a byproduct of the pasture sanitation program. See? That's a perfect example of building a holon. That's called a holonic business, when you take a waste stream and you actually create an income stream as a result of that waste stream. Okay? And then we went by the cows. So the cows, they're in their paddock for the day. And I want to park here at the cows just for a second, because the cows have gotten a pretty bad rap lately. If you've kept your ear to the ground on, environmental magazines and the cowspiracy and stuff coming out, there's cows have pretty bad rap. And so let's shuck down to they say in Missouri, shuck down to the cob here on the cows. The cows are basically herbivores. If you think about it, the planet is full of herbivores. I mean, llamas and alpacas in South America, guinea pigs, and you move over to Africa, there's a lot of herbivores in Africa, right? I mean, wildebeests and gazelles and zebras and giraffes and elephants, and you move on up into Indochina, you got yaks and water buffalo, and go on up, you got reindeer, and come across Canada, moose and caribou, and then bison and all. Man, there are a lot of herbivores on the planet. Well, what's the reason for that? Well, the reason is water somewhere. The reason is this is sunshine. Okay? This is sunshine. I think one of the coolest things in the world to meditate on is that 95% of all vegetation is sunshine, only 5% is soil. So isn't it cool that these plants, through photosynthetic activity in the chlorophyll, can reach into something as esoteric and mystical as sunbeams and grab them and put them into something that's weighable, fungible, measurable, tradable. Is that not cool? All right. So if we're going to, so the planet runs on this sunshine converted into biomass. Now there's 3 basic kinds of biomass. There's trees, bushes, woody species, and forages, grasses, legumes, herbs. All right. If I ask you of those 3 things, trees, bushes, or forages, which one of those 3, which classification is the most efficacious, the most efficient at converting sunbeams into biomass? What's the answer? Well, you guys are smarter than the average bear. It's always not fair when I've got well-schooled people here. If you go down to the street of Stanton and ask the average soccer mom, Nature Conservancy member, what'll she say? She'll say, trees. Because it's intuitive to think, you look at the trees, look at the forest, look at all that carbon. But that's the accumulation of 50, 60, 70 years of carbon. If you take your lawn clippings and you took a square yard of your lawn and you were able to bag that square yard and bag it and keep it over here for 60 years, and then at the 60th year, pile them back on that square yard, that'd be a pile of carbon. Are you with me? So the metabolism of forages is faster than the trees and the shrubs. That speed has a downside. The downside is senescence occurs faster. Okay? Because there has a much faster metabolism, they sprout, grow, live, go through their life, and die way sooner than a tree or a woody species. So the grass grows in an S curve. I'll make a very crude S here. Hope you can see that. It starts slow, and then it speeds up, then it goes into senescence. I call these 3 phases, this one right here I call diaper grass, this one's teenage grass, and this one out here is nursing home grass. Okay? So if we want this forage to grow as fast as possible, of those 3 stages, where do we want it as much time as possible? Teenage. Yeah, this is not a trick question. It's very basic, okay? The point is, if we leave it in first gear or blow out the engine, it stopped. Okay? What we want is we want that juvenile, fast teenage growth cycle. All right? Well, how does that happen when in literally 60 to 80 days, this plant can go from down here to up here and quit? I'm glad you asked, because the answer is the herbivore. So the herbivore comes, fortunately, this plant hits the most nutritive position for the herbivore right up here, right heading into, before it goes into senescence. And so the herbivore comes along right here and prunes it just like a viticulturalist would prune a vineyard, or an orchardist would prune an apple tree, not to kill the tree, but to stimulate new, aggressive, fresh forage. So the herbivore is God's plan to prune all of this prairie and efficient metabolic grasses on the planet and restart. So I call the herbivore a biomass accumulation restart button, okay, to prune and restart this fast growth cycle. That's how the planet works. That's why all the rich soils on the planet, the deep soils, were not built under trees. They were not built under shrubs. They were built under prairies with herbivores. Now, when you look at the way these herbivores, function, we're going to get 3 more M's real quickly. 3 more M's. It's moving. It's not staying in the same place. It's moving seasonally with the monsoons. Wolves, predators are pushing it along. Flies are pushing it along. Their own desire for fresh ground pushes them along. They're moving. They don't stay in the same field. They don't stay in the same place. They don't even stay in the same, the same bedding area. They don't stay any place. They move. Okay. Secondly, they're mobbed up for predator protection. They're not all scattered out all over the hillside. They're mobbed up for predator protection. And the third thing is they're mowing. They're not eating dead cows and chicken manure and feathers like we're still feeding. When the U.S. I call it the U.S. took farmers like me to free steak dinners for 30 years to teach us this new scientific progressive way of feeding cows, where we grind up dead cows and feed them back to cows. Some of us didn't buy into it. Of course, we were labeled Luddites, barbarians. What do you want to do? Go back to hoop skirts and hearth cooking and washboards, and we were laughed at. About 30 years later, there was this kind of big global, oops, maybe we shouldn't ought to done that, right? Well, who was right? We were right. The scientists were wrong. And the reason we didn't buy into it was not because we hated science or because we hated, the U.S. or whatever. It's because we looked around the planet and said, where do herbivores eat carrion? And you know what? The fact that we didn't know why they don't did not mean that it was okay to just do it with impunity. The movie Jurassic Park, where the scientist is euphoric over having these clones and these, raptors, and they're destroying the civilization as we know it, eating people and cars and all this stuff. And he's exulting in his great triumph, and the journalist, his archetype, gets in his face and he says, but sir, just because we can, should we? That's a powerful question. That's a powerful question in a culture and a civilization worshiping at the altar of choice. We've never had so many choices. And I won't explore that completely, but we've never, right? We are the society of choice now. And we want to be free to choose even things that destroy us. It's my choice, right? And that's the point. We can choose things to destroy us. My dad used to say, we're pretty clever. We got this big brain and opposing thumbs, mechanical ability. Boy, you link up our mechanical ability with our intellectual ability, man, we can overrun our headlights. In fact, we can invent things that we can't morally, ethically, spiritually, physically, or mentally metabolize. And so what happens is we use our creativity and mechanical ability to create things that it takes 5 generations to try to remediate. So half of our research is done to fix the problems we already created. So those cows, so when we look at mowing, at moving, mobbing, mowing, we're looking at those cows, saying, well, how do we duplicate that on the commercial scale? We don't have fenceless, areas from Florida to Ontario anymore. We don't have wolves anymore. We don't have fire anymore. We don't, what are we going to do? And so what we have is electric fence. And that electric fence becomes a steering wheel, a brake, and an accelerator on that four-legged pruner. So we literally steer them around the farm just like you'd steer a zero-turn mower, a great big zero-turn mower. Okay, so the paddock that they're in, so we went out to the eggmobile is sitting where they were 4 days ago. And then they came to the paddock next up, and then the paddock up on the hill, up on top of the hill. Last evening I put them in the paddock that they're in right now. This afternoon I'm going to move them across the lane into the next paddock over. So every day they move to a fresh paddock, and then the eggmobile stays with the fly cycle right behind them long enough to harvest those nice fat maggots just before they pupate into new flies and spread out the cow patties. And by doing that, the average cow days in Augusta County is 80 cow days. A cow day is what one cow will eat in a day. So you take all the food you eat today, put it on a plate, that's one person day of food. So what one cow will eat in a day is one cow day. So in Augusta County, our average cow days in Augusta County is 80 cow days per acre. We average 400 cow days per acre, and we've never bought a bag of chemical fertilizer or planted a seed. That's not bragging, folks. That is giving glory and praise to an infinitely designed system. The trick is to have the humility and observational skill to look at that system and say, wow, how does it work so well? And then duplicate it in a context of modern day, of where we are. So just imagine if the neighbors got 400 cow days per acre instead of 80, and their neighbors got 400, and the whole county got 400, and the whole state got 400. We'd produce so much food you couldn't imagine it. Okay, so our problem is not overpopulation. Our problem is not lack of food. Our problem is constipation of imagination. Okay? And then finally we left the cows. We came down the hill safely, fortunately, without skidding, and we went back through the barn there. And I hope you noticed the pigs over there on their deep, all right, that's pigerating compost. And this time of year, that's my favorite thing to take people, because we only do it for about 6 weeks of the year. So in the winter, when the cows are done with grass, this hay here, which is basically like raisin grass, it's dehydrated, it's dried grass, okay? So it's like raisins from grapes. This is hay from grass. Okay. So the cows eat that dried food in the wintertime. They're dropping 50 pounds of goodies out their back end every day. 50 pounds. All right? Yeah, try cleaning up that mess. All right? And they ain't potty trained. Okay? But this material out their back end is what builds soil. It's what it's the resource, see, that makes it work. And it's highly volatile. So if it gets dry, it wants to vaporize. And it's highly soluble. If it gets wet, it wants to diffuse. Well, in the dead of winter, the soil, all the mycorrhizae and the gibberellins and the actinomycetes and the mycorrhizae, all these things, they're all sleeping, right? And so they don't want to be fed in the wintertime. And so when we do feed hay, we put them in that hay shed there, and we put a carbonaceous diaper underneath them to absorb all of this soluble, volatile nutrient load, chemically bond it with the carbon. And then when the carbon, and then as it builds up, of course, the cows, they're walking, they're tromping out the oxygen. All right, so it's actually anaerobic. It's fermenting, anaerobic, like sauerkraut, like wine, like pickles. All right, there's a lot of stuff that we ferment, okay? So it's fermenting in there, anaerobic. And then we add corn to it as it builds, and it builds up. You saw how deep it was, it was 3 feet deep or better, okay? And so when the cows come back out to begin grazing in the spring, when the grass gets long enough, then you've got this deep bedding pack full of fermented corn. And then we put the pigs in, the pig aerators. And if you look real closely, you can see all of them had a thing on their forehead that says, "We'll work for corn." And the pigs then go in and they seek that fermented corn embedded in that anaerobic material and fluff it and turn it, and that's why we call them pig, like aerobic, oxygenate. They aerate that bedding and convert it from anaerobic to aerobic compost. And we don't have to do anything except drive by and enjoy it. Okay? The pigs do all the work. The reason farmers don't like to do large-scale composting is because of all the materials handling. And I'm sure you've all seen these, windrow compost piles with big, $20,000, compost turners, and they're all. That's obsolete, man. That's old school. We got to use animals to do the work. And the pigs fully love this. We're not asking them to do something they don't want to do. They love doing this. This is hog heaven in there. Okay? And from a spiritual standpoint, suddenly now those pigs are not just pork chops and bacon. Those pigs now become co-laborers and team players in this great land healing ministry. See? And that really fundamentally changed the emotional, relational, spiritual aspect that we have with what we have. Same thing with the eggmobile, same thing with everything. We're looking at how do these different beings express their phenotypical distinctiveness, and how do we honor that and affirm? How do we affirm the pigness of the pig? Because we believe that a culture that views pigs as just mechanical, which is what our industry does, the orthodoxy of our industry is that life is fundamentally mechanical, and we believe life is fundamentally biological. There's a big difference between mechanics and biology. There is mechanics in biology, but there's way more than mechanics in biology. And I would suggest that a culture that doesn't ask how do we respect and affirm the pigness of pigs will eventually not ask how do we affirm and respect the Thomas of Tom and the Maryness of Mary and even the other cultureness of other cultures. So there becomes an ethical, moral framework around how we view life around us. And so the pigs then, it'll take them about 6 weeks to go through that, do all that turning, and then we spread that compost, and that becomes our fertilizer. So I'll just close with this. The carbon shed was next to it. You saw some compost, wood chips, bark mulch, different things over there. So that's the carbon shed that feeds the over here where the animals are. Just imagine for a minute if all the money spent, just take Virginia, forget the whole U.S., just take Virginia. If all the money currently spent on chemical fertilizers today were suddenly spent on carbon, we would have an incredible industry literally spring up overnight, cutting diseased and down junk out of our woodlots, upgrading our woodlots, taking the junk and leaving the best, instead of taking the best and leaving the worst, which is what the logging industry does, generally. We would become resilient in our own fertility systems. And you know what else? It would offer incredible, sacred, noble vocations for the 40% of the population being displaced by robotics. If you go to any business conference today, people that are looking into the future are scared to death about what do we do with the 40% of the population that's being displaced from factory jobs, from truck driving, when trucks don't need a driver anymore. Like the buggy whip operators. Not everybody, believe it or not, wants to sit in front of a computer all day building fantasy castles and hitting a delete button at the end of the day. There are still a lot of people who like to have calluses and splinters in their hands and work with the soil and do craft and visceral, tactile things. How do you build a culture that affirms, respects, and honors those people that for 4 decades we've condescendingly referred to as blue collar? What you do is you create meaningful, affirming, noble tasks that integrate us instead of segregate us, and integrate us into our ecological umbilical and reattach our connections to the humus as humans. And that, I suggest, is a cultural slam dunk. I hope this has been okay. It's not our normal deal, but I hope it's been okay. It's been an encouragement to you. Now, may all of your carrots grow long and straight. May your radishes be large but not pithy. May tomato blossom end rot affect your Monsanto neighbor's tomatoes. May the coyotes and the neighbor's dogs be struck blind at your backyard or pastured chickens. May all of your culinary experiments be delectably palatable. May the rain fall gently on your fields, the wind to be always at your back, your children rise and call you blessed, and may we all make our nest a better place than we inherited. Thank you for coming. Come back. Stay as long as you want to. Thank you very much.